So how can you define life? Well, somebody asks you to define life. That's kind of a hard thing to put into words. Scientists really define life by an organism and what characteristics it has. If it has these certain characteristics, then it can be considered living. Sometimes. So in the biblical worldview, life is only from God. And so how would we look at things like viruses? Well, for today's, what I'm talking about today, we mostly focus on how it's classified in science. But it is important to you to have a biblical worldview as well, because it is part of God's creation. Colossians chapter 1, verse 16 through 17, for by him all things were created in heaven and earth, visible and invisible. All things were created through him and for him. So because it's a part of, they are a part of God's creation, so it should be important to us, because we can figure out new ways to understand God and glorify him in many other new ways by studying things like viruses and understanding whether they're living or not. So it is controversy in the science community that viruses are considered non-living. Many scientists will say that they're non-living, but there are scientists out there that say it's living. There's a lot of new studies that have come out to kind of argue both sides. So science in school has always been taught that viruses are non-living. So when I was in school, I remember the teacher saying, viruses need a host to survive, but they're non-living. And I was like, how does it survive, but it's not living? That doesn't make any sense, right? So schools always taught that. You check any textbook, and you'll see that it says that viruses are non-living, and that they're basically just some genetic material in a protein coating that can use a host to replicate. It has to use the host parts that it doesn't have to replicate. So we need to understand what they truly are to provide proper defense. I believe we'll have major improvements on medications and vaccinations and just protection from disease in general if we can understand better what a virus is. I have a quote here from Michigan State University. They say, like all living organisms, viruses change over time. In other words, they evolve. Viruses are changing, and so is science. We're learning new things every day. Now, we talked about understanding the true nature of viruses and how it can benefit us. Let's talk a little bit more about what a virus is exactly. So a virus, I believe, is living because they have many characteristics of living organisms. They can reproduce. They hijack a host. They pick a host. First of all, they're able to pick one. They select it, and then they use its components that it lacks in order to replicate itself. I have a quote here from National Geographic. It says they may use an animal, plant, or bacteria host to survive and reproduce. They attach to a cell, and they can inject genetic material into a cell to use its components. Viruses are able to evolve and adapt. It's another able to evolve and adapt to its environment is big key characteristics of a living organism, according to science. The COVID virus, that was able to evolve and adapt. I have another quote here from, this is NPR.org. It said, COVID has caused devastation because it could change rapidly. In other words, the virus has the opportunity to try out different mutations, different attacks against the human immune system. Those mutations, in turn, may help it spark a new wave of infections. So because it's able to change, adapt to the human immune system, that's another major reason that it should be considered living. Viruses contain genetic material. So viruses, like all living organisms, contain DNA. I have another quote here from genome.gov. Most viruses have the same basic structure. A genetic information molecule in the form of nucleic acids, such as DNA and RNA. It's just fancy way of saying they have DNA, all of them, and RNA, just like living things. They do, however, others will argue that they do lack some characteristics of life. And my counter-argument to that is, well, so does other things that are considered living. They need a host to reproduce. Many organisms do, such as parasites, but parasites are considered living. They can't activate without a host. There are bacterial spores, seeds, that also cannot activate without a host. They're considered living. They don't respond to environment. Well, that argument is also invalid because we just talked about how they can respond to an environment. They can respond to immune system changes and drugs. They can change and adapt to them so they can work better. So now that we know what a virus is and the reasons they are not classified as living, what are some of the advantages to accepting or disadvantages for not accepting that they're living? So, we need to understand that viruses are living because they will be beneficial to us as humans. We'll have more medical advancements. I have a quote here from Robert Wagner. Knowing how viruses package their RNA with high selectivity, a feat achieved with more than 99% accuracy by some viruses, could help scientists engineer their own versions of capsids in the lab to leverage them as a powerful scientific tool. It's a mouthful, it's a lot to take in, but it basically means that the fact that a virus is so complex and is often underestimated could be a reason we're missing key details there to achieve some pretty powerful systems that can help humans. It could, if we understand viruses are living, it would also improve education. Understanding viruses from both perspectives helped me personally see that science is not just set answers in the first place. It's a process of discovery. It taught me to think critically and ask questions and look at evidence rather than simply accept information. Once I understood viruses better, I was able to recognize how vaccines work and appreciate why research